Good Yontif. As I stand before you, I remember, must have been about 10 years ago, when one of my ministerial colleagues here in town, Jack Deal, shared a sermon with me, a story with me, and that became the basis for one of my Rosh Hashanah sermons. And tonight, one of his successors, the associate from Our Savior Lutheran Church, Pastor Nicole Eastwood, shared with me a sermon that caught my attention. And as I read it and I looked at it and went back to it, I realized how powerful it was for this night of Yom Kippur. And it is amazing over these 20 years to have those kinds of relationships where we pass stories and sermons and wisdom back and forth to each other, learning from each other and learning with each other. In this case, it was a little different than what Jack shared with me. In this case, Nicole and I have a shared passion in our household. Like her husband Ian, I am also a passionate fan of English Premier League football. Started during the pandemic. Soccer, as you all call it, came back first in the United States and then in Europe before any of the other American sports did, and so I started following it. And Nicole and I were talking. I root for Chelsea Football Club, go Blues. And her husband is a big fan of Liverpool, so there's a bit of rivalry. And as we do discuss sometimes who's doing what, whose team is doing well, whose team is not, whose team is on to a new owner and a new coach. It gets to be interesting when you're passionate about something like that. However, in addition to our passion for English Premier League football, that then opens up in other interesting avenues, because when you're with your clergy colleagues, you also talk about the television shows you watch. And English Premier football, of course, cross paths with media in the form of a show, brilliant and beautiful, called Ted Lasso. I am just curious, how many of you have seen Ted Lasso? Okay, you can put your hands down. Now, if you have not seen it, don't worry. Number one, it's on Apple Plus. This is not an endorsement, although if it was, never mind. So it's hard. So if you're not a subscriber to Apple TV, you might not have access to watch Ted Lasso. And I will also freely admit you might see the subject of it, just the groans that I said when I said English Premier League football, and you might groan and say, I don't want to watch a sports show. What you have to realize is that Ted Lasso, while it is a sports show, is not really a sports show. The whole basis of the show is about a coach named Ted Lasso. He is a coach of American football. That's the one with the brown ball that's oblong that they play in all the pads. You know it here. It's called football. You all know that one. In Europe, they call a different game football. That's the one with the usually black and white one with the goalpost that you don't touch with your hands. And the whole basis of Ted Lasso is this coach, Ted Lasso is for an American football team. And there's an English Premier League team that the husband and wife who own the team get divorced. The husband in the divorce loses his team, which is his passion. And his ex-wife is now running the team, and she hires Ted Lasso, an American football coach, to run their English football team. Now, if you're wondering what an American football coach would know about English football, you are absolutely right. He knows nothing about it. And that's part of it. She's using the team to get back at her husband because she wants it to miserably fail, and his baby, his passion, his love would be then crushed and decimated and relegated. That's a whole thing in European football. And that was part of her whole plan, that it would be just a crashing and utter defeat. He, of course, is Ted Lasso. He wins people's heart. He just has this way about him with kindness, with grace, with beauty. It is an incredible story with beautiful characters. You've got the coach. You've got Coach Beard, who's his assistant. You have players like Jamie Tart and Roy Kent and Danny Ramos. And if you have watched Ted Lasso, you're cursing with Roy Kent. You're preening your hair with Jamie Tart, and you're saying football is life with Danny Ramos. It's really pretty incredible and absolutely beautiful, and I love that Roy Kent who is just this dark, grizzled guy who curses all the time, is actually Jewish, British, a comedian, Brett Goldstein. It is truly amazing. And you watch this show unfold, and they have all of these moments of struggle, and there are moments of joy and celebration. And as you're watching the show, which really isn't about football, it's about human dynamics and human interactions, and what does it mean to be a team and a coach and an owner, and they go through all of this, and they demonstrate so many of the experience of our lifetimes that, in fact, we wrestle with on these days of awe. And so on this Yom Kippur, I want you to bring you this show that some of you have seen and some of you not, because there is one character that has not the best time. And his story stands out to me as I stand before you on this Yom Kippur as an incredible challenge. And usually you don't use the negative lesson to teach, but this is Yom Kippur. And sometimes we need to understand humanity at some of its worst in order to understand our struggles on how to be better. And I apologize if you are watching it, you have not finished watching it. There will be some spoilers here, but I hope it won't take away from the rest of your watching of the show. There is one character, and his name is Nate. And Nate is the equipment guy. In fact, we don't know his name at the beginning, because when Ted comes to England and starts playing with this, working with this team with Richmond AFC, he's just a shadow of a little guy in the equipment room. People throw towels at him. People bark orders at him. He is barely even recognized. He's a little nervous, and he's just disregarded, and he's ignored, and even teased. It is kind of awful to watch how people just disparaged and dehumanized this human being that was part and parcel of their team. But Ted does not treat Nate that way. He acknowledges him, and he starts, you see over the course of the first season, Nate comes out of his shell. And then he starts talking to Ted. Remember, Ted knows nothing about English football, but Nate is a genius. He's passionate, as so many people are, and he starts teaching and coaching, and that's part of the beauty. Ted Lasso listens to him. He wants to learn, and he starts implementing some of the stuff that Nate shares with him. And it keeps continuing as you see Nate become more and more human and accepted and part of that locker room and part of that team. But by the time you get to the second season, something isn't right. Nate has become a coach. And you watch and you cringe. Because if he's a coach, that means they need a new equipment guy. And what do we see? Nate, who was treated so poorly in the first season, starts treating the equipment guy with the same kind of nastiness. Just dehumanizing, degrading, chewing him out. There's this time where he gets some attention for one of his strategies, and then you sit there and watch him pore over his social media, looking for likes and getting mad when there are dislikes, just totally obsessed with what other people think of him. And when he's given advice, because his dad is not nice to Nate, cruel and belittling to his son. And so Nate is not sure how to stand up to his dad, and he goes to a couple of the characters. And Rebecca, who's actually the owner of the team, she shares that she has had struggles standing in front of very intimidating people. And she shares the story that when she realizes she's going to have to face one of those situations of conflict, what she would do is get a mirror, and she would stand in front of the mirror and puff herself up. And she would just growl like a bear, and she was going to go and do it. And she used that mirror to assert herself and find herself in that space. What does Nate do? He stands in front of that mirror and spits at his own reflection. It is heartbreaking. It is awful. And you watch this as this character who you saw coming out of his shell is just flinging shards of brokenness all around. The behavior continues to escalate through the season until finally Nate, who's angry at Ted for all kinds of strange reasons, Some of it you can rationalize, and some is just mean. He gives a reporter information that is damaging to Ted. And then finally, as they're in the midst of their last game, you get the rant, where Nate stands in front of Ted and he says this: "You made me." And you can just feel that rage in his face, and you see him shaking his fist. "You made me feel like I was an important person in this whole world, and then you abandoned me," he says. He said, "I felt invisible," even as he tried to get back at Ted's attention. And he talks about how he gave Ted a photo and Ted couldn't even put it in his office. What he doesn't realize is Ted has it at home next to the picture of Ted's son. And he says, "Everybody loves you, the great Ted Lasso. Well, I think you're an effing joke. Without me, you wouldn't have won a single match. And they would have shipped your," he doesn't say tuchus here, but I'll let you translate, "back to Kansas, where you belong with your son. Because you as sure as hell don't belong here. I do. I belong. This didn't fall in my lap. I earned this." And Ted stops him and tries to listen. Nate cuts him off and storms out. They go out to the second half. They come back. Nate is gone. And this beautiful sign that says "Believe," hung crookedly just for character, has been torn down and shredded on the floor. It is awful to watch. To see this human who was coming out and finding himself and bringing joy and life to the team, to see that venom, to see that ugliness, to see that awfulness, that way of treating one human being to another, you cringe, you're upset. There are whole boards that say, should we hate Nate or not hate Nate? What do we do with this? And in fact, there are all sorts of different explanations of why Nate did what he did. Was it toxic masculinity? Was it microaggressions and racism? Was his self-confidence destroyed by his cruel and dismissive father? You watch Ted Lasso, this beautiful feel-good story, and there's just this one character left in and admitting pain. Is he the villain? Is he the victim? Is he the unredeemed? And you read these articles, there are so many discussions online, lots of sermons and lots of articles trying to wrestle as you watch this human being fall apart and spew darkness into the world, wrestling with what happened and what should happen with this character. And I share that with you because, in fact, that to me makes it an incredible Jewish story. Some of you have heard me say it. The more commentary you find, the more discussions and responses you find, the better a piece of Torah is. Because you can be sure that no one knows what the real answer is, but you can be sure that there is real value to wrestling and thinking about it and considering it. I share, Nate, with you that rant that he has, that behavior he has, because in this one sermon that Nicole Eastwood shared with me, there's a quote by Father Richard Rohr, who's this Catholic theologian, fantastic theologian, and he said, "You can tell a lot about someone by what they do with their pain. Do they transform it, or do they transmit it?" I watch that, and I watch Nate transmit his pain, and I wonder about us and how we move through the world. On this Yom Kippur, that's our challenge. As we move through this world, how do we face our own pain? The pain that we feel and the pain that we cause. What do we do with it? Do we catalyze our pain and our tsuris and challenge? What do we turn it into? And I keep thinking about Nate. He seems to keep looking for reasons to be angry, hurt, and reasons to find fault with everybody else around him. They're the ones that put him in this mess. Tomorrow morning, we're actually going to read that very challenge and response to us. We read it in Isaiah, Why, when you fasted, why did you not see? When you starved our bodies, did you pay no heed? Because on your fast day, you see to your business, you oppress your laborers. Because you fast in strife and contention, you strike with wicked fist. Your fasting today is not such as to make your voice heard on high. Just like Ted Lasso, it's just like this story with Nate. We are fasting to feel service. We are fasting to feel challenged, to deprive our bodies of some of our ruach and koach, our spirit and strength. And what do we do with it? Isaiah warns us not to turn around and turn our discomfort and our lack of not to be hangry and turn that into cruelty and being short with the people around us. I watch it in Ted Lasso. Each time Nate has a chance in his pain to work on healing or kindness, he takes it in the other direction. He strikes out. He literally spits out, and he tears down. It breaks my heart when I realize that while this is a fictional account, it represents what so many of us as we move through this world. And this brings us to Yom Kippur. From that same sermon, Nadia Boltz-Weber wrote, "Your wounds may not be your fault, but their healing is your opportunity." That's why I share Ted Lasso and Nate's story with you. This isn't just a day when we face our sins. This is not just a day when we admit our mistakes. We don't just pound on our chests and say we are sorry. This is Yom Kippur. It doesn't translate into the Day of Atonement. It doesn't translate into the Day of Forgiveness. What does it translate into? The Day of Atonement, at one-ment, creating unity by doing the work of making shalom, of unity and harmony in our hearts and our homes, of doing tikkun, repairing the damage, physical and psychological and spiritual and emotional. Like Nate, we are all going to have hurts. We're all going to cause hurts, big and little. Many of us might watch Ted Lasso and feel that connection with Nate and what he goes through, or so many other characters of TV and movies and books, or the real people that we see, whether it's on the news or our neighborhood. We don't look at this day and ask for a world that's without pain or loss or mistakes. For even as we feel trauma, even as we have our scars, even as we explore the damage of the past, we have to be aware not to diminish or demonize, but how are we going to take that and do this work of Yom Kippur, of growing and catalyzing and digesting it into light and love? In the original sermon, and finish with these very simple words. She said what she wished for Nate, and it is truly a message for us all. She said, I want to see Nate's pain transformed. I want to see him be forgiven. And for sure, I want to see him forgive himself. She admits, okay, I really just want all of that for me. And I want it for you, she says. Imagine if we could just transform all of that stuff that has happened to us and stop transmitting it everywhere and blaming the people who love us and being awful to the people who could have been helping instead. So, to me and to you and to everyone, she says, please do your work. And I add that if we do this work of this Day of Atonement, we can look around. We can see the beauty inside and out. We can appreciate the blessings of our lives and feel the connection of heart and soul, body and being that infuse us and empower